Hello, thank you for joining us. My name is John Schneider, and I'm Mass Insight's Director of Policy and Advocacy. A recent report published by the Center for American Progress shines a spotlight on the need to close our nation's advanced coursework equity gap. The report, Closing Advanced Coursework Equity Gaps for All Students, is a wake-up call for those concerned about the lack of challenging courses for students of color and low-income students, and provides recommendations for how we can tackle this problem. There's a link to the report in our description below. Joining me is one of the report's co-authors, Roby Chatterji. Roby is a senior policy analyst, K-12 education at the Center for American Progress. Prior to his current position, Roby worked for an education consulting firm and served as a congressional aide to the chairman of the U.S. House Committee on Education and Labor. Welcome, Roby.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here. Really excited to talk with you about this work, and also just want to congratulate you and Mass Insight on the great work that you guys have been doing. It was very informative and helpful in writing my report.
Well, thank you, Roby. Hey, real quickly, before we talk about the report, tell us a little bit about the Center for American Progress and what you guys do.
Sure. So the Center for American Progress is it's essentially a think tank based in Washington, D.C. It's full of a lot of former administration kind of policy wonks and different folks who've been in the advocacy space. So we have a variety of different teams from economy to housing to immigration to education, and we do research and advocacy around progressive ideas for the country.
Right. Thank you. And so when you took on this challenge to do this report, why a report now about advanced academics when so much work and there's so much attention and focus on addressing learning loss?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, admittedly, there are some really acute needs that school systems are addressing and understandably are taking priority at this moment, getting kids back in school safely, making sure that school buildings that the kids and staff are in are healthy and safe and have, high quality air and water. And, there has been a huge disruption in student learning throughout the pandemic. I take a little bit of hesitancy to use the term learning loss. I feel like, it's been more of an interruption and kids have been adapting to this new normal just like the rest of us. But regardless, it's always going to be a priority for schools and districts to ensure that students are able to demonstrate the kinds of skills and competencies that is going to be expected of them in college and in their careers. And so this work to me is still relevant because it's focused on transitions and pathways for students as they get ready for the rest of their lives, whether that's post-secondary, whether it's a career. And, advanced coursework is actually one way that students in high school actually stay connected to the system. More and more students are finding their last couple of years of high school are less engaging, and the value proposition that some of these classes offer, where they can potentially earn college credit or relieve some of their future debt, that's a meaningful experience for them. So that's why this work to me doesn't supersede learning loss, but it is part of the the overall need to look at how we're making learning relevant and engaging for students.
What exactly do you mean, when you talk about advanced academics? What are some examples of an advanced academic curriculum?
Yeah, so advanced coursework or advanced academics, the simplest definition is that these are courses that offer high school students both credit towards their diploma and the theoretical chance to earn college credit at the same time. And the reason I say theoretical is that, some of this is up to the Institute of Higher Education in terms of what they ultimately will award. But, the kinds of classes that are, the mechanisms that students have to take advanced coursework in high school. Some of the most popular ones are International Baccalaureate, or IB, dual enrollment so they're kind of dual or concurrent enrollment, where they might be taking a class at a local college or university. There are early college high schools. And then the most popular mechanism is the advanced placement program. And I can get into a little bit about like the benefits of, students taking these courses if you'd like.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, because there certainly has been an expansion of different opportunities for students to earn college credit in high school. In fact, there's legislation here in Massachusetts where we would actually create an office of college and high school within our state Department of Education, where there would be some coordination with these different pathways, if you will, or these different programs. So, just talk a little bit about maybe the strengths and the advantages, disadvantages of some of these different programs.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one thing is like all of these different mechanisms have benefits for students, right? When you're talking about advanced coursework for high school students, you are talking about, coursework that is rigorous, that it's demanding, that the expectations for students are at such a level that it really gives them a chance to demonstrate the skills and competencies that are going to be expected of them in college and in their careers. And so the benefits come through in a lot of ways for students. They tend to have a higher self-esteem, their absences can go down, there are higher levels of engagement with their coursework. And those benefits also transfer into their post-secondary education. A lot of folks who take advanced coursework are more likely to graduate on time. They are likely they're not going to have a need for remedial education in college as much and can pursue a double major. They're likely to get some exposure while in high school to a possible career field of interest. So those are a lot of ways that the academic component of advanced coursework benefits students. Now, between the different mechanisms, there are some benefits that, they're always evolving and shifting. So, dual enrollment is a good chance for students to sometimes see what course, like an actual course at a college would look like. The challenge with dual enrollment and concurrent enrollment in some cases is that the credits that they might receive from that class are not accepted nationwide. AP and IB courses tend to be more nationally recognized. That's not always the case, but that tends to be the pattern.
Now, let's talk a bit about the research and your findings. You do focus much of the research around AP in the report, and so why is that? How did AP kind of become a proxy for advanced academics in your research?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's as much the answer to that question is as much about what data is available as it is just the scale of the program. So AP, the Advanced Placement Program, run by College Board, is at this point the most popular mechanism for students to take advanced coursework while they're in high school. It's available in all 50 states and Washington, D.C. It has kind of a comparability factor built in the fact that students across the country take the same test and they're graded on the same scale. So you can really see if students in Massachusetts are, demonstrating proficiency at a level similar to students in California or Texas or Montana. The other reason that we used AP as our proxy for advanced coursework in this particular research is that the data is there. There is a federal database called the Civil Rights Data Collection that up through 2016 used to report on essentially the participation and performance of students in advanced coursework across all 50 states. Um, One of the real calls to action in this report is that we need more data. I would have loved to have data on dual enrollment and IB or early college high school models. The barrier is that there just wasn't a nicely assembled, curated way to examine that data. It was hard to find, it was hard to aggregate, and in this case, AP was there through this federal database.
And that's one of your recommendations in the report, is to really develop kind of a national data house on a data set on advanced academics that's consistent across the state, so that we can really begin to unpack what's going on. One of the unique things, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to share your screen and show us this what you call the AP funnel. So why don't we do that, Robbie? Why don't you share your screen, and we'll take a look at the AP funnel, and you can talk about, kind of explain this to us, because it's really an interesting way at looking at AP across different states.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about the AP funnel in this report, I think it's probably first important to kind of just sort of like take out the complicated terms and sort of just realize we're talking about attrition, right? And what I mean by that is, by default, as kids have access to AP, each progressive level is gonna have less students kind of at that you can count. So like there's so many students in a high school, right? That could be like even a different stage of the funnel. Then there's only so many kids that take AP. Then there's only so many kids that take an AP test. And then ultimately it narrows down to the lowest point of the funnel, where there's only so many kids that pass an AP test. So I think the reason we chose funnel is so much of the discussion in education is around pipeline, right? It's kind of this idea that you can just put an input in and it comes out the other end. What we're saying is, in this case, it does winnow down, right? Like, depending on how many AP courses are available to a student, that affects how many will enroll in an AP course, which, and how many enroll affects how many will take an AP exam, and how many take an AP exam affects how many will pass. And at each stage they get lower. So when we talk about the funnel, we're saying there are these different points of how students progress through actually taking an AP exam and passing an AP exam. And so when we go through this funnel, what we're saying is, the first thing is we do need to examine what is their level of access, how much availability of AP coursework are they being exposed to. Then we want to look at, well, from there, how much or what percentage of students or students in a school are enrolling in AP courses. And then it keeps going down. Then we want to see how many would take an AP exam, and then ultimately how many would pass an exam. And getting the data at each of these points is informative for different reasons. If there's not a lot of availability, then it kind of lets us know that your enrollment, taking, and passing are going to be lower. If there's lots of availability, but there is still a lower enrollment, or there's maybe there's a lot of folks who did enroll in an AP course but just didn't pass, that is informative, I think, to schools and districts about where they may want to structure their interventions. And that was a big part of the research in this report, is we wanted to get beyond access alone, like fully admitting that's a first initial barrier, but even comparing students who had similar levels of course availability at their high school, what were the differences when you were taught, what are the patterns really? Like if you have a high school that has 10 AP courses versus 18 AP courses, is it any different in how many students are enrolling or which students are enrolling? and taking and passing AP exams.
One of the things that we want to do is, and I think I'm saying this right, is widen the funnel, right? We want to, we want to create supports and policies and practices that help more students succeed in AP. And you highlight some of that work in the report, some of the work that Mass Insight does, but other organizations as well. So if you could just give us a couple of examples of ways in which we might be able to, make sure that we have a nice wide funnel here for helping students succeed in AP classes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna move away from the screen share for now, but I think you've hit the nail on the head. You want to kind of widen the funnel, and you also want to to the point that you can address some of these drop-off points or these leaky points, right, in the funnel if you're a state or a district or even an individual school. And so the strategies that that we've been focusing on, or the interventions, I think it's really important to say up front that there's not, just like a lot of policy interventions, there's no silver bullet. There's more of a silver buckshot or a scatter shot, if you will, right? A lot of these policies, if done in tandem, can broaden access equitably and grow participation and performance. But if I were to talk about some of the things that we saw in our research that are paying dividends. So the first thing that states and districts should be looking at is, based on your data, you may need to figure out, do you need to expand AP access? Because while we're looking at factors that go beyond availability, the fact of the matter is, if students don't have AP available to them, they can't take it. So if you're a school or district that has limited AP, then your first intervention would want to be expanding the amount of AP coursework or other kinds of advanced coursework that you can offer. So that might be, that could require some teacher PD, so that you're actually training teachers. And
one of the things that we find is that you've got to factor in some support for teachers and for students and even for families, kind of help them understand the expectations and provide the skill and the support needed to succeed in these classes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's how I look at it, and what we look at in the report is, first you got to make sure your supply side is there, that you've got enough AP courses available for students to take. But then it's exactly what you said. It's all these other factors that help make sure that students are actually participating and succeeding in AP coursework. And some of the ways you can do that are through vertical collaboration. That's a big one that we found. So what that really means is that, AP doesn't begin in 9th grade. And so you would really want, ideally, your middle school and elementary school teachers and principals regularly talking with your high school teacher and principal, because they will then be able to kind of say, here is what we need students to know in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. And here's the way that we're teaching it. And then that instructional vocabulary and that concept mapping can start all the way in elementary school and work its way up, so that when students get to high school, they're actually prepared for the rigors and demands of AP coursework. The other is exactly what you talked about, which is essentially school culture and supports, right? So once you have these AP classes available in your high school, and you have students who are prepared to take them, I think the next real step is, how do you make it part of the school culture and easy for families and students to participate in? So that is things like eliminating the test fees that are associated with AP exams. It is building some awareness and counseling around making sure students know that AP is available and that it's for them, right? That the expectation is that students are encouraged to take these classes. There's also, Mass Insight is doing some great work, I know, in the Massachusetts area around kind of creating almost like pep rallies around the start of the school year or around the time of AP exam, so that students get kind of hyped about it and realize it's important. Um, Another thing that we've seen is working in some areas is essentially also these removal of biases and barriers to entry. A lot of times advanced coursework in particular is reliant on teacher recommendations or counselor recommendations, and bias has a way of creeping in, and some students aren't properly identified or they're overlooked. So there are some other models that we've seen that kind of help eliminate that. So universal screening for gifted and talented earlier on in students' educational careers gets them on the path earlier to taking more rigorous and advanced work. And then other policies that we've seen that are doing good work are automatic enrollment policies, which essentially say that if a student meets proficiency levels on a statewide examination, then they're automatically enrolled in the next higher class, including advanced coursework. So that way they realize, like, no, you definitely belong in this class based on your, academic proficiency. And that also helps widen the pool of folks that are getting in.
Well, Robbie, thank you very much for your time. There is an awful lot in this report, and I urge folks to link to it at your website and take a look at the report. And I'm sure you'd love to hear what people have to say about your research and your work. And I want to thank you for taking some time today to talk to us about it. And we've appreciated having the opportunity to collaborate with you and your colleagues at the Center for American Progress on this research. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I am really excited to, keep sharing this work. And thank you again for giving me some access to seeing the kind of work that Mass Insight and other organizations are doing, so that I can see on the ground perspectives and practitioner perspectives about creating peer learning communities that are helping teachers and students really succeed also when they're in AP classes. This has been a game changer, and keep doing the great work that you're doing, and we look forward to sharing more of the data from this report and other kinds of work.
Thank you, Robbie. Take care.
Thank you, John. Take care.